Okay. You have permission. You have permission, and you have permission. You're probably asking, who is this guy? Why in the world is he giving us permission, and what is the permission for? Here's the deal. I know that there's somebody in this audience tonight who's thinking about a career change. There's probably somebody in this audience who's thinking about a relationship change. Maybe you're starting one. Maybe you're ending one tonight. And maybe you're about to do something that everybody else thinks is crazy. See, I'm a 45-year-old father of 3, 14, 11, and 5. In fact, 2 of them are here tonight. Their mother, Daryl Calfee, my wife of over 20 years, died. When that happened, I was left with the question of, what do I do next? Who's going to give me permission to change? And so tonight, as we talk about the art of change, I've lived it for the last several years. See, I grew up a funny fat kid in West Virginia. I was actually a hog calling champion. That's a blue ribbon there, in case you're wondering. I won the hog calling contest at the West Virginia State Fair. And in about 6th grade, I started to realize that there was something different about me. While I played all the sports, and my parents can tell you we played all the sports, I felt like I loved art. And in 7th grade, Miss Carrier bought my first piece of art. She was my art teacher in junior high, and it changed my life. This idea that I could create something that somebody else loved, and that they would spend money on it, and I could do it in art, and it all came together for me. And so as I started to think about colleges, I really liked the idea of art schools. But unfortunately, as a football player, you learn they don't have football teams, and they don't have campuses. And so through a series of events, I found myself in the coach's office here at Liberty University, getting ready to start to play spring ball. And then this happened. I cut my foot in half. This is an x-ray from about 2 weeks ago. This injury is over 26 years old. In fact, I did it here on the James River. I ripped my foot in half, and as you can tell, bones aren't supposed to fuse back together like that. So I went from being this kid who was really into sports, and that was my whole identity, and I had to shift quickly to somebody that was something different. So I leaned back into art. I went back into marketing and design and advertising. I want to give you this idea tonight that when these kind of things happen to us, we look at ourselves as artists and not victims. All artists have constraints. Think about it, for example. If you're a painter, maybe it's the size of your canvas. Maybe it was the colors that they gave you to paint with. Or maybe it's just your budget. When you learn that all artists have constraints, it really changes the way that you look at what's ahead of you. The next 20 years of my life looked a lot like this. And some of you guys here tonight were with me when we were doing this art. I went into advertising and marketing, and along the way, I started traveling the world for work and compassion, and it began to change my life. In fact, here in northern Uganda, I learned a really important lesson, that all houses are huts. When I came back home, I brought that idea to Johanna, and we changed everything. We changed our perfect house in the perfect neighborhood, and we went on this really crazy journey. In fact, some of you guys even called it crazy, where we moved into a HUD home. If you don't know what a HUD home is, it's a housing and urban development home. This place was a complete disaster, dead cats everywhere. My mother wouldn't even step foot inside the house. But it changed our life. It changed our budget. We spent $350 a month on this house. We spent more money on each other. We spent more money on experiences. And for the first time, I really started to understand what made me tick. It was in this moment that I realized the sooner that you understand that you're the only one that wakes up concerned about your happiness, the faster you start to make decisions. There's a renowned urbanist named Jane Jacobs, and she's often quoted as saying, that old buildings just need new ideas. And so that's what we started to do. In fact, a lot of you guys have been a part of my new art for the last several years, and maybe you just didn't even know it. My new art started to look like this. In fact, tonight, maybe you had dinner with your spouse in my new art before you came. Maybe this morning, you had a cup of coffee with a friend in my new art. Maybe perhaps you had a bagel in my new art, and then you probably really need to go to CrossFit to work off that bagel in my new art. Maybe you took your kids to a martial arts class downtown, or maybe you went to the retro arcade. Those things became my new art. The truth is, and I do want to say this humbly, is that we were on a roll. Johanna and I were really in our sweet spot for the first time in our marriage. And to be frank, HGTV producers were calling. I thought the rest of our life was going to look a lot like this. But instead, it started to look a lot like this. See, if you're new to the story, Jo was diagnosed with stage 3 inflammatory breast cancer when she was 38 years old. And it was just a month after finding out that she was pregnant with our son, Emmanuel. So on August 14th, 2019, as we sat in the oncology center here in Lynchburg, Jo was faced with this really hard question. If you terminate your pregnancy now, we can begin your treatment tomorrow. I will never forget the courage it took for her to say, absolutely not. She delayed her own treatment, she delayed her own care, and because of that, it gave our son Emmanuel a fighting chance. After the second trimester, she began treatments after treatment after treatment. Many of you guys were there. Many of you sat with her. She even had a mastectomy when she was pregnant with Emmanuel. We have a saying in our house that we wear our scars on the front, and Johanna lived it out. In March 14th, 2020, we got this guy. Emmanuel arrived, and so did COVID. Many of you guys remember this moment. It was like the world stopped. In fact, they kicked me out of the hospital. Jo stayed in a mostly vacant NICU, and I went home to do what all of you guys did. We all became homeschool parents. It became really clear really fast after all of the treatments and all of the recovery that Jo needed more. She needed more time, and most importantly, our kids needed more. They needed more of me. So it made the next decision really easy. I walked into the office of my good friend, Sackett Wood at Moore & Giles, and I said, hey, I'm stepping down from my role as Vice President of Marketing, and I'm going home. I think it was in that moment that I knew I was doing the right thing, but it didn't feel good. It felt like just another constraint being placed on me. And to be frank with you, I was angry. I had a sense of loss. I was struggling with my identity again. Like, who was I? What was I supposed to be doing? There's a lot of you guys in this room tonight who have been through that. You became the primary caregiver. And to be frank, I felt like a single parent. And then it happened. The cancer metastasized. It moved to her liver. And I just knew that we were not going to get out of this one. The scans, the numbers, they all were bad. But she and I just held on to hope. We had so much hope. We had to. Our friend Jill talks about this often, that hope is a sewer rat. It just gets by on scraps. And for 2 years, we got by on scraps. And then in August 2023, she passed away. To be really honest, I was scared. The thing that I was really scared about was, what if she passes away in our home? What am I supposed to do? Who do I call? Do I take her to the hospital? Do I call an ambulance? I'd never been through this before. None of our friends had been through this before. And so that morning, August 30th, 2023, as she laid in the hospice bed, she took her last breath. Just me and her. And all of a sudden, the thing that I was so afraid of was gone. I knew what to do immediately, and I called my kids, and they came down. I will never forget standing in that room with them. You know, they didn't run. They stood there and they watched their mom die in front of them. I watched Emmanuel crawl in the hospice bed with her, tried to wake her up. They faced their fears. These were fears that we talked about quietly in our house, in the kitchen, or on the edge of the couch after she was going through a treatment, or when I'd put them to bed at night. They would ask me, is Mom going to die? I'm so proud of them. Today I parent them like people that I respect, people that have been through hard things. I don't parent them like they're little kids. After the room cleared, I knew what I had to do, so I called up Catherine. She had labored beside me for a couple days. She is the absolute best. I called up hospice. I called our friends and our family who'd been on standby for the last 24 hours because they knew too. And by that time, the funeral home was coming. So I knew what I had to do, and I wanted to be the one to do it. I took her wedding rings off of her fingers. And I quietly folded her hands on her chest. I wrapped her up in the quilt that was left on the hospice bed. And I zipped her up in the body bag. Slowly, just over her face, it was just peaceful. She was at rest for the first time in a long time. Along with the gentleman from Tharp, I pushed her out the door and into the hearse. I'll be honest, man, I was gutted. For the weeks that would follow, I just felt hollow. Like, what am I supposed to do? How do I become another version of myself? I think I felt like this disease had stolen everything from us. It had stolen our careers. It had stolen, at times, our joy. At least it had tried. It had tried to steal our joy. And let me just say really quickly, I just want to make this really clear, that if it was not for our community, many of you guys in this room, my story would be so different. I am so grateful for you. You know who you are, and I'm so thankful. In the days and the weeks that followed Joe's death, something became very clear, and I absolutely hate that it took this. But loss really clarifies life. I knew who needed me, what needed my attention, where I needed to be. It really invited me to just skip the bull. And in most casual relationships, there's another word that I put after that, but you get where I'm going. So when I talk to you guys about permission, I was seeking it. I really felt like I needed permission from somebody that I knew, that I trusted, somebody that had really been through hard things. So I did what anybody would do. I called up Billy Barksdale. And I said, hey, BB, can we do lunch? So we're sitting at Isabella's, and he looked across the table, and I hate him for this, but he says, DC, you're just asking all the wrong questions, man. And he was so right. Because it struck me that in that moment that I had already started to become the new thing, right? Like these buildings that we had been working on. I had been through the demolition process. I was still there. I was still useful. But like Jane Jacobs said, like, I just needed new ideas. So, I got some new ideas. I've done some new things. I'm going to go through a really fun list with you guys. I wrote a book. Shameless plug. It's out front. I seriously never thought that I would be a published author. We always thought that it would be Joe that would write the book, but it became really clear that when she wasn't here that somebody needed to write down all the hard-fought wisdom that we had earned over those 20 years. I began renovating some buildings that people were really scared of. In fact, we're about to start some of the scariest projects that we've ever done. And speaking of scary teachers, I went to parent-teacher conferences by myself. I became a softball dad. For you guys, I became a softball dad. I got more tattoos, Nana. I started a Mexican restaurant with some friends who really are family, and it has been es un gusto. This one was tough. I opened myself back up again. See, for years, I declined the calls and the texts to get coffee, to meet with other men, to make new friends. I just didn't have space or time for it. But I opened myself up to it again. And along the way, I created the most beautiful relationship and camaraderie with another man who had lost his wife. He is raising 4 boys by himself, and he's rebuilding his own home as well. And I went on my first date in 23 years. Let's talk about awkward. But she's here tonight, and she is so special. If you guys know her story, this is redemption for her as well. And our family is eternally grateful for you. And if you're wondering, yes, I started praying again. I feel like these old buildings, I'm just being restored. I want to leave you with Joe's words. This is something that's tattooed on my arm that she would say to me. She knew that there was times that I was just chomping at the bit, like there was work that had to be done. But she was exhausted, guys. She was just so worn out, so beat up. And I can visually see her like mustering all of her energy, and she would sit up and she would stare at me. She'd try to smile and she would say, hey, like, I'm good. You go. And in the weeks that followed her death, like I just kept hearing this all the time. I would hear, hey, D, like I'm good. Like I'm really good for the first time. Like you go. So back to that whole permission thing. There's a secret. You guys don't need my permission. So in the words of Joe, you're good. Go. Thank you.